Welcome to our open development stream for January 2020. And since this is the first stream this year, belated Happy New Year to all of you. And yeah, we will be looking at the Spline Deform tool that we have has been voted for by our patrons. And we decided to break this up into two projects, each one lasting 1 month. And the first one is an axis-aligned spline deformation. And to show you how that works, I'll quickly just set up a project from scratch. I have prepared a mesh that is in a different directory. Wrong content. It's this one that I want. All right, let's try again. And yeah, there we go. So basically what we have here is 3 meshes that are subdivided. If I go into wireframe view, yep, you will see that they're subdivided a lot, and they're also single-sided, which is why you don't see them from every angle. And I've been basically using these as a test mesh for deformation. I'll just put this one away, put this one away, and this is the one that I want to deform. First thing we need is we need a spline that we want to deform this to. So I'm going to the db&w tab, and one thing we added last month was an option to add and edit a spline right away without having to add it, then click away the window and then turning on the spline edit tool. So you can do this with one button now. So add and edit spline, and I can start dragging points to create a spline. And one thing I'll do is I'll turn all of these knots into smooth knots. That way, if I later on animate them, the curve is going to be nice and smooth. And something you don't have to do, but something I just want to do right now to keep things clean, is I will position the first knot exactly at the origin. All right, so now we have our spline. I drop the tool. I go to the mesh that I want to deform. Go into the mesh properties. Turn on nodal displacement. And add the spline deformation node. There it is. And connect the displacement output to the input of the displacement. And let's open the user interface. I select which spline I want to use to deform the mesh. And that's essentially it. And now if I go back to edit the spline, you will notice that it actually deforms the mesh. The shading errors that you might notice there are mainly because it's double-sided, and Lightwave doesn't really seem to like that very much. So yeah, this is basic spline deformation. And it's axis aligned because what it does right now, if I just quickly turn it off, drop the tool, go back to the, where is it? There it is. All right. So basically what this does is it takes the x coordinate of a mesh and uses that to calculate a distance along the spline, and then just moves the vertex toward or onto that spline in relation to the 0 x axis in the original mesh. And you can change the orientation here using the deformation axis. That's why I created those 3 meshes to test out all 3 directions. The direction plus minus doesn't work yet. But another option that you have that I've added already is you can actually make the mesh fit the spline. So if you have a fit to spline, you will see that it extends the vertices of the mesh to fit the spline. And if I go to the spline editor again, like so, and move these points, you will see that it's just being, stretched with the spline. And of course, if I animate one of the points on the spline, then the deformation is going to follow that as well. World coordinates also doesn't work at the moment, but that is eventually going to take the world coordinates of the spline as opposed to the local coordinates. So right now what you can do is if I take the spline item itself and I just move it around, you will see that it doesn't actually affect the deformation of the mesh in any way because it's just using the positions in relation to the local origin of the spline. All right, let's turn off fit to spline again. Another thing I've also added is you have the option to define an offset distance. That's basically the offset on the spline where deformation starts. So if I turn this to, let's say, maybe 5 meters, you will see that the deformation starts later. And since I've actually not enabled fit to spline, it ends later as well. And you can also animate this if you want to. So I'm going to end at frame 120 at, let's say, 10 meters, start at frame 0, 0 meters, and you have the mesh basically follow the spline and then also move along the spline and even along a moving spline. One option for the offset is that you can also use a relative mode. And the difference is that absolute takes an absolute distance from the start of the spline. Relative takes a distance in relation to the total length of the spline as a percentage. So 0% is the start of a spline, and if I put it to, let's say, 25%, then the deformation is going to start after the first quarter of the spline length has passed. And you can animate this as well as you want to and switch between either of those modes. So that's essentially the current state of the tool. So what's not working right now is the direction, and to be quite fair, I'm not super sure on how to implement that, and the world coordinates, and then of course anything that you guys come up with that you suggest. And also one thing that I've, the last thing that I've added is, where is it? There we go. If you have a closed spline like this one, and you animate the offset, just bring back the nodal displacement here. In this case, I've got a percentage offset, a relative offset, and I'm just animating it from 0% to 100%. And the spline deformation node actually recognizes that the spline is a closed spline and will wrap around the deformation. So this spline starts and ends at this point down here. That's the beginning and the end of the spline. So this is 0%. It starts to deform the mesh at the beginning of the spline. And if you play back the animation, you can see that once it reaches 100%, it just wraps around. So you can have closed splines and deform meshes along those closed splines as well and loop them any way you want to. And I suppose that's my first test scene. Just so you see what I created those axes for. There we go. It's this one. Yeah, this is the one that I've also used as a screenshot. So basically, this was to test the deformations along the three major axes. So this item here is deformed along the x-axis, this one along the y-axis, and this one along the z-axis. And if you go to the individual nodal displacement settings, you will see that, yeah, for this item, it's along the z-axis. So yeah, that's essentially the current state. Main things to do are the world coordinates and the trying to change the what do I call it? The direction. To be quite fair, I'm not really sure on how to do that because I'm kind of afraid of normals flipping and things like that. So in this case, I mean, right now you basically have to model for the spline deformation and can't deform any kind of mesh, but you have to at least align it properly. One thing that's missing that I forgot to actually add, at least in the user interface, is either a reference item or a reference rotation that would basically allow you to essentially place a local pivot as opposed to use the pivot of the item. It would allow you to place a null item somewhere along the item and say, okay, I'm going to rotate the null item as well, and that defines the local axis and not the actual local axis of the mesh. So you can kind of override that. I can do a recap. Yeah, sure. Are there any questions so far? While I take a sip of coffee. If not, then I'll just, I'll loop myself. Um, all right. So basically, this is the simple test object that I created. I'm going to use a different axis this time just to make it a little bit less boring. So I don't actually need this one, and I don't need this one. And what I have here is a mesh that's nicely subdivided, that's pointing upwards, so it's along the y-axis, at least if you're a light waver. And I want to deform this, so let's just zoom in a little. And what I'm going to do is add a spline, and I'll use the new add and edit button that adds a new spline and jumps straight into the spline editor. And I'm going to place my first point here, second one here, third one here, and my fourth one up here. And I will make sure that they're all smooth. Actually, might make this one linear and this one as well, just for the heck of it. All right. Then I'll keep my first one selected, open the numeric panel, and set that to 0, even though it really doesn't make a difference. And that's all I'm doing on the spline side of things. So I'll select the mesh, and I'll just make it solid wireframe so you can kind of see what's going on. Open the properties panel, which is on the other display. Activate total displacement. There we go. Add the Spline Deformation node. Connect the displacement to the input of the displacement node graph. Open the user interface. I can move this away now. And select the spline, which now obviously is using X as a default axis, but I actually want Y. So I'm just switching over to Y. And you see that it's being deformed along the Y-axis now. And yeah, that's essentially how this thing works. As you can see here, actually, there's a bit of a twist. And that's because it does take the alignment along the axis into account. So let me just make a fit to spline so you can see that it actually twists here and it twists here. And that's because, and that's especially obvious in this case, the up vector, I'm going back to the spline editor, the up vector for the knots always points up by default when you create it. So, in a case like this, you should actually place it somewhere else to get a nice deformation with a nice twist along the spline. Actually, no, it's the wrong direction. This direction. There we go. And unfortunately, this is a little bit tricky to do. And there might even still be... Oh no, there's no bug. That's the way it should be. The only bug that I have here is how it gets a little bit skinnier. But yeah, this is also the trickiest one to do. All right, that looks fairly decent actually. So yeah, in some cases you will have to adjust the alignment along the splines. Mikael, in the channel in the Patreon section, the bottom one, that's where Dogma and I are. I'm not sure if anybody else is here. I'll have to check. Oh yeah, and Scott's there. Hello, Scott. All right. So yeah, in cases like this, you will have to, work a bit with the alignment. I'm not sure if I can add a guide spline right now, if that's something for the next iteration of the deformation. And yeah, one thing I showed is that this works with animations as well. So if the spline is animated, then the deformation is going to be animated as well. And why shouldn't it? And also you have the fit to spline option, which basically stretches the whole mesh to the length of the spline. And another option you have is the offset distance, which allows you to animate the offset of where the deformation starts along the spline. So right now it's 0, but if I animate it from 0 to, let's say, 10 meters, oops, the other way around, frame 120, 10 meters, then you will see that the mesh will crawl along the spline. And you have the option of defining the offset as an absolute distance in real-world units, or as a percentage of the total spline length. So, if you want a deformation to always start in the middle of the length of the spline, you can do that as well. The direction hasn't been implemented yet, and world coordinates, which will eventually take the world position along the spline, not the local position, That's still work in progress as well. And just to show you how it works, because it's local coordinates, if I take the spline itself and move it elsewhere, then the deformation doesn't move with it because it's just using the local coordinates of these points on that spline. And also one thing that I certainly want to add is either a reference item or something that allows you to essentially work like a local pivot for the deformation. So if you've modeled something along the z-axis, but actually want to deform that along the x-axis, you could um, take a null object that's rotated by 90 degrees along the vertical axis, and then use that as a local pivot point override almost. And that's probably going to be extremely useful if you have something that's modeled at a wonky axis, but you want to actually deform it and don't want to actually rotate it back. Mikael, if it doesn't show your page, if it doesn't show on our Discord, then it could be that you didn't link up your Discord account to your Patreon account, because that automatically gives you access. Either that or you're logged in with a different account at the moment. But normally, once you link your Patreon account to the Discord account that you're using, um, something you do on Patreon, then you automatically get the rights on our Discord server to go to the section for patrons only. So yeah, that is essentially the current functionality. Still some tweaking to be left to do. What I am going to do is essentially take this as it is, create the Mac version, which I haven't compiled yet, and send that out as a preview. So you guys have something to play around with until the Q&A session next Friday. And I will continue to work on the things that I think is missing or are missing, and to wait for you feedback to see if you find anything else that you would consider to be crucial. Pardon? What's missing? Well, for one, the reference item to have like a local coordinate system that basically allows you to align the deformation axis to your mesh if it's not along the major axes. That's the one thing. Then the world coordinates, and to be fair, I think this direction plus minus, I kind of thought it might be a good idea, but right now I'm actually not sure on how to implement it or how it should actually work. So I'll kick that out. That was just basically, oh, I think I will need a direction, but then how, what, why? So that's going to go. But yeah, the world coordinates and the reference item, those two things are definitely going to be in there. And I'll probably actually make it a reference item, because otherwise you would have to have an input for at least a position and a rotation, and then you can't really see it graphically how it aligns with the spline. So it just makes more sense to just select an item that is going to be a reference item for the deformation itself. Overshoot is tricky-ish. I suppose, yeah, I could add an overshoot, actually, an undershoot as well, because I actually had two. No, I had some kind of wrapping modes, but they were more like the ones you use for textures, like wrapping a loop and a mirror, but they don't work with meshes because they basically just destroy your meshes. But an overshoot and undershoot would work and should be fairly simple to add. I'd probably add them as, maybe wrap mode or something, begin or end wrap mode that's either hold or extend. And basically, what it would do is take the direction at the last or the first point, which is this. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. You have this blue line here, which gives you the direction along the spline. So I could basically use that and just extend it further. And that would give you the direction for the overshoot. Yeah, the trickiest thing is to find a direction for it, but I actually have it. So yeah, that's something I can add. Absolutely. All right. Anything else? This is going to be so short today. Yes, before we actually do something else, there's also another little addition that you are going to get as patrons. And basically, because I've been playing with so many different versions of Lightwave to see that plugins are compatible, yada, 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 I often have to go to the settings directory. And I got tired of typing all those paths into my Explorer. So what you will get is a button that allows you to open the settings directory. I just recapped them. I can't recap them twice. A button that basically allows you to open the settings directory. And it actually did open them over here for your current Lightwave instance. So it's just a quick way to navigate there, and those are the settings used for this version of Lightwave. So if you're running multiple versions or something like that, then it's going to take the one that's currently used by layout. And even though it's not strictly Patreon, I've also extended our quick pick, which now also has a open directory option, and that allows you to open all the directories that basically the Lightwave SDK provides easily from within Lightwave. So for example, if you want to go to the images directory of your current scene, you can just do qd images and it opens a new Explorer window on this display. That goes into the current images directory. And also, because I roll like that, this open settings dir thing is essentially a command for Lightwave, and you can use that with scripts to basically get kind of the same functionality that you will get in QuickPick. What you will be able to do is basically write a script that opens the content directory and then assign that to a button, for example. And I will provide a small sample Python script for that in the wiki. So you can use that functionality with the db&w tools for free, or eventually, once we release the update for QuickPick, you will get that there if you actually own a license of QuickPick, which you should. Well, it was so seamless because I was looping, and it was a good loop. All right, so yeah, I don't know how many of you actually know QuickPick, but yeah, I'll give you a quick overview, even though this scene isn't really made for it. But QuickPick is basically it doesn't matter how we spell it; it's always tricky to pronounce. Basically just gives you a menu and you bind it to a shortcut and the menu looks like that. And the whole idea is that you can use the whole menu using shortcuts. And especially with Lightwave 2019, which allows you to select to search in pop-up menus, you can do very common tasks. No, it's not. It's not yet. It will be. Um, and that's just supposed to, make navigating around common tasks in Lightwave so much quicker. Like, for example, if you want to select an item, of course, you can move your mouse down here, or you can keep this list open, but you can also just do QI, and that gives you a pop-up of all the items. And then if it's a long list, you can just start to type, and bam, you're done. No comments about Lightwave 2020, because if I make any comments, Juice is going to come over and shoot the both of us, and then you won't get any new plugin releases. So hey. So yeah, I mean that's essentially the whole idea behind Quick Pick. But you can do so much more. You can select items, which is anything, or just specifically objects, bones, lights, cameras, surfaces, and either have it open the surface editor or the node editor. You can, depending on what you currently have selected, like right now I've got the spline selected, so I can do a QP and it shows me all the plugins that are assigned to the null, that's the spline. And one of them is, for example, the spline primitive. And I open that, and then I get the user interface for the db&w tool spline primitive. Um, you can also do things like change a view layout with essentially 2 key presses. And yeah, as I said, mainly because of the search functionality in 2019, this is just so nice to use, especially if you're a keyboard jockey. And also one thing you can do, you have the custom menu, which is this one. And this allows you to basically put any of Lightwave's commands into the menu. And in this case, I even added the ones that I've added to the db&w tools. That's the open installation directory thing. As 3 different ones. So the first one opens installation directory. The second one, the config directory. This is images and this is content. So for example, what I can do here is Q U for custom, open content, and come on, yeah, my Explorer is a bit slow. And that's my content directory. And yeah, that's what Quick Pick does in a quick nutshell. And yeah, as I said, the open directory things are going to be added. It is. I mean, just remember to press Q first, and then think if you need another menu option in Lightwave. So basically, the first thing you should do is just press Q. Is there something I need there? No, there isn't. Okay, let's do something else. But quite often you will just find that lots of the stuff is going to be there. Just opening, I don't know, surfaces is just so much nicer. And that's actually how it started. The db&w tools had a pop-up menu, and it's still in there, called a surface selector. That would basically just open a window with a pop-up where you can select a surface and it would open the node editor. That is something that you guys have in the db&w tools. And QuickPick is essentially an extension of that to try to make common workflows as quick as possible. Yeah, I blame work as well. So hey, that's 2 of us. All right. So yeah, that is pretty much everything I have to talk about for now. So unless you have any more questions in the stream or on Discord, we will call it a night. But I have to say we have 14 viewers, and I think one of them is Dagmar. Um, but still, that's quite decent. So it's very nice to see all of you live. And yeah, well, they say it's going to be released this year. Actually, there is one thing that I can say, and that's that we're going to make sure that all of our plugins will work with 2020. The db&w tools will certainly be released in a 2020 release. We're not quite sure yet if they will need a different plugin file or if we can use the same file for multiple versions of Lightwave. As far as our commercial plugins are concerned, if they need a different plugin file, which means they need a different compile and maybe some compatibility changes, then it's going to be a paid upgrade. If they don't need any changes, then you can just use the current versions. But we will make sure that they all work. Absolutely. And also, if you buy them this year or even in December, it's going to be a free upgrade anyways. And Carm, before you fall off your chair, the upgrade pricing won't be that high. Well, if it is, you go make a deal with Dagmar. The sad thing is, of course, that you can't hear her because I'm not routing the audio, but she just said, yeah, maybe it will be. So, big thanks to all of you for showing up. It's Friday evening, at least over here, so have a nice weekend. Don't indulge too much in the alcohol. And thank you, Mikael. Yeah, and you all of you that have joined us and aren't patrons, we're very, very happy if any of you would join us and support us. And those of you that are, thank you very much. I hope you like what you've seen so far. And yeah, we'll see the patrons next Friday at the Q&A stream, and everybody else in about a month's time when we have the next development stream. So thank you very much. Good night and bye bye.